The Sopranos follows the life of New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano as he navigates his professional and personal life. Throughout the course of the show, we see Tony having to overcome numerous challenges, such as the betrayal of his close friend Pussy, the suicide attempt of his son AJ, and enigmatic thieves who steal his lo mein. In Season 6, New York Lupertazzi crime boss Phil Leotardo starts a war against Tony and his glorified crew, and though he possesses the supernatural ability to turn into a house, Phil ultimately loses the war, with his own underlings betraying him and coming to a deal with Tony behind Phil's back. After this, Tony and his crew, in spite of taking heavy losses, are now in the clear, though Tony still has many issues to deal with, like the strong suggestion that his capo Carlo has flipped to the feds. In the final scene of The Sopranos, Tony arrives at Holston's for a meal with his family and selects Journey's Don't Stop Believing from the jukebox control at his table. One after the other, Carmela and AJ arrive, with Meadow outside, struggling to park her car. They eat, engage in small talk, and just as Meadow reaches the diner door, Tony looks up and we cut to black. And so ends one of the most infamous endings to any TV show, one that has infuriated fans, leading many to think that something was wrong with their TV when they first watched it. It is a hotly debated topic, even today, decades later, as to what actually happened, with many fans thinking Tony was shot dead in that moment. In this video, I wanted to explore the possibility of Tony having died, and in particular, running down a list of suspects who could have wanted him dead and carrying it out. Now, of course, not everyone agrees that Tony died. I myself do think that he snuffed it, in case you're wondering, but whether Tony died or not, and the numerous clues, such as Bobby Bacala's line about not hearing it when it happens, is not the point of this video. There's so many theories regarding the ending of The Sopranos, like, for example, Meadow being Tony's guardian angel throughout the show and her not making it in time to save Tony. Let's assume he did die, and take a look at a roster of individuals who may have done it. So first of all, let's throw out some alternative theories. Maybe Tony died, but no one killed him, i.e. he had a heart attack. Or maybe the cut to black wasn't a death, but Tony having one of his many panic attacks, with it causing an immediate blackout. Maybe the entire scene takes place inside the mind of Tony, with it being another weird dream. Maybe it was us, the audience, that were whacked. In any case, one thing that is clear from the ending of The Sopranos is that Tony is finished, every which way but loose. He is completely morally bankrupt in spite of efforts to change, and he no longer attends therapy with Dr. Malfi. He has committed heinous crimes such as the murder of his protege Christopher, and seems content and lacking in remorse. Most of his crew have been wiped out, including Consigliere Silvio Dante, who could easily spend the rest of his life in a coma, and his list of enemies is so huge by the end of the show that even if someone didn't pop him, Carlo testifying against him would surely land him a hefty sentence in prison. In other words, as stated, even if he didn't die, he's finished. But again, that's not our concern with this video, and before we continue, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell for more Sopranos videos. So who actually pulled the trigger? Well, it's likely the man in the members only jacket. The camera takes a particular interest in him. He is quite a shady and nervous looking character, and he takes a trip to the loo, which is a direct reference to The Godfather, with the famous scene where Michael Corleone goes to the toilet to grab a gun which has been planted there. Of course, we might question why the hitman would even need to go to the toilet to retrieve a gun. Surely he'd have one on him. But it is a clear homage to Francis Ford Coppola's film, and perhaps an indication that this man murders Tony. If he did come out of the bathroom and shoot Tony, the angle at which he would have shot him is 3 o'clock, going back to Christopher's message to Tony supposedly from the other side in this scene at the hospital. And it also reinforces the Meadow guardian angel theory, as if she made it in time, she would be sitting next to Tony and blocking a clear line of sight for the killer. But who gave the order? The list of enemies Tony has and people he has wronged is incredibly long. There's Georgie, who worked at the Bing, who Tony beat up on numerous occasions, leading him to leave the club. There's Dave Scantino, who was ruined as a result of his gambling addiction and the debt he owed to Tony. There's the Vipers, who Tony and Chris stole from. Adriana's mum, who is adamant her daughter was murdered. Even Artie Bucco, who came close to shooting Tony after his restaurant was burnt to the ground. Perhaps Carlo's ever-building resentment of Tony led him to getting rid of the guy who told him to start sucking cock. How about Noah, the Hasidic homeboy who may have walked into the diner and punched Tony's fucking lights out. Maybe Christopher came back as a zombie of sorts, Cleaver style, to take revenge on Tony. But on a more serious note, there is still a huge list of characters who would benefit from Tony's brains being splattered all over some onion rings. Is it possible, for example, much like how Bobby Bacalao thought the New York-New Jersey war had ended and was subsequently killed, that a New York soldier just didn't get the memo and ended up whacking Tony when the opportunity arose? Unlikely, but with the amount of crazy theories there are about the ending of The Sopranos, this isn't the most far-fetched. One possibility I don't see people discuss is Lou DiMaggio and his crew, the old creepy blind hitman who Chris and Sylvia approached in season 4 to take out Johnny Sack. This scene is very surreal and the old mobsters give off David Lynch-esque vibes. They don't appear to be in the best of shape, and the photo Chris and Sylvia show to them of Sacks includes Tony, and all Sylvia says is the guy on the left. It's easy to assume the old guys could have gotten confused. You can imagine them later discussing, was it the guy on the right or the left? And this crew isn't really followed up on in the show. Maybe, just maybe, and seeing as though they were past their prime, they took their sweet time, but eventually they or one of their hitmen managed to track down who they assumed was the target, a situation which ended up with part of Tony's brain slapping Carmelo across the face a few years later. Now, with the guy in the diner wearing the members-only jacket, our thoughts have to go back to Eugene, who the show makes a point to highlight that he is wearing a members-only jacket. And the jacket isn't the only link between him and the guy in the diner. They even look similar. Could this be a relative of Eugene, a cousin or something, out for revenge after Eugene's suicide, which was in part due to Tony not allowing him to retire after Eugene inherited a small fortune? Either way, Eugene's wife, who didn't appear to have a high opinion of Tony, definitely had the cash to hire a hitman. So perhaps in her scorn, she got a guy to take out the man who she blamed for her husband's suicide. Another possibility is Slava, the head of the Russian mafia in New Jersey and a business associate of Tony. Why? Well, the botched debt collection by Paulie and Chris converting Slava's friend Valerie, which results in the duo trying to assassinate the Russian but ending up losing him. The fate of the Russian is something I've discussed in a previous video, but Tony is shown to be concerned at the event in Pine Barrens, as things could go very bad if Valerie ended up surviving, going back to Slava and telling him what happened. We're told that Slava loves Valerie like a brother-in-law if you will, and it's feasible that he may have thought that Tony was attempting to perhaps muscle in on his business, or he was so distraught after finding out what happened to Valerie, so he okayed a hit on Tony. It is suggested in a later episode, Chasing It, that Slava and Tony are still on good terms, but you never know. Maybe Slava learnt what happened to Valerie later, or the Russian boss simply bided his time. Another person who went missing in The Sopranos, and someone who had reason to kill Tony, and even tried to in a temporary moment of madness, is Furio, an efficient mobster who worked for Tony but ended up falling in love with his wife, and then mysteriously goes incognito. Tony claims to Carmelo that he has people looking for Furio to kill him, which I've always thought was a bluff, and it's likely Furio returned to Italy where he would be safe and Tony's word has little influence. Now why would Furio want to kill Tony? Well, he wants Carmelo. Plus, in his love-sick mind, he will feel he's performing a just act by freeing Carmelo of the abusive Tony. Could he have built support for himself, using his contacts back in the old country? Or could he have gotten a local hitman to take out Tony, in a wild plan involving him knocking on the door of a grieving Carmelo and sweeping her off her feet, with the two living happily ever after? Hey, crazier things have happened. Could it be possible that Junior, sitting in a mental facility alone and confused, in a rare moment of clarity, managed to contact someone in the mob and had Tony taken out, after having his season 1 hatred of Tony reignited by his mistaken memory? It's a stretch, and Junior was pretty much shut out of the mob life at the end of season 6, but who knows? I don't think anyone suspected he would be the guy who okayed a hit on Dickie Moltisanti until they saw The Many Sins of Newark. One theory I've seen circulated is that Rhiannon, the friend of AJ who got to know him in a mental facility and went on to become his girlfriend, was somehow involved in the hit, either by being a plant from the Lupatazzi family or someone who was asked by the Lupatazzis about Tony's location in the final episode and she answered, thinking the whole thing was innocent. Rihanna knew where the Sopranos family would be, as she is in the house when Carmela says they are going to Holston's tonight, and she even looks up when Carmela says this, showing that she has registered what has been said. She's also in the final episode a lot, being given an unusual amount of screen time in a season finale for such a minor character, and some feel a picture on the wall of the Lupatazi's main place of business is of her, which is a stretch, but if you buy into the theory, you could argue that she did do some modelling, so there is a link there. Personally, I've never thought much of this theory in spite of its popularity, though I concede there is evidence for it. There are issues that rise though, like the probability of New York using an underage high school girl as a plant, and the fact that Tony wasn't in hiding when the Lupatazi conflict even began, so they wouldn't need her at that point when she met AJ. And by the end of the final episode, the war was over, so he wasn't hiding then either. Tony's movements wouldn't be a secret, and a top secret high school spy wasn't necessary. I also don't like this theory because it gives prominence to a minor character in such a major talking point of the show. When we think who killed Tony Soprano, we think of names that played big parts in the show, but Rhiannon? Who even is that? I imagine a lot of Sopranos fans would say. Another possible mastermind behind the Tony hit is Little Carmine, who may have seized on the fractured state of New Jersey to swoop in, decapitate, and do business with what's left. A popular fan theory suggests that Carmine Jr. was actually some kind of secret mastermind who Butchie was reporting to by the time of the season finale, and he had manipulated things to escalate the war between Phil and Tony, what with the whole "whatever happened there" line, which sends Phil irate during the meeting of the minds. This is an interesting theory, one I've discussed in great detail in a video of mine called Why You're Wrong About Little Carmine, and it does have merit, but ultimately I don't buy it. As mentioned in the other video, I think there are some major holes in the theory, and plus I think it does a disservice to Carmine Jr.'s entire arc. You know who else had an arc? This guy, Butch DiConcini. Butch is someone who was actively pushing Phil to go to war, but then all of a sudden gets cold feet and makes a deal with Tony. Butch's evolution is really interesting and is something I've explored in a video of mine called Why Did Butch Turn on Phil? And there is a suggestion that perhaps Butch was playing the long game and wanted Phil to get whacked so he could take the top seat, and then he could take out Tony, who he never liked and whose murder he advocated for numerous times in the show. Either that, or while he was in the trenches, he just wanted the war to be over so everyone could go back to doing business, and an added byproduct of ending the war would mean he becomes boss. Butch ordering the hit on Tony is my favourite theory on Tony's death, one that I see working. That, or Paulie or Patsy, or more to the point, a combination of all three. This really should have a detailed video all on its own, and maybe I will do one day to stop this video from being too long, but to summarise, during the chaotic New Jersey-New York war, Butch turned on Phil, this we know. Once the war was over and Phil was dead, Butch sanctioned Tony's murder because A. Tony threatened Butch at gunpoint, was an overall unpleasant character, was emotional, and the key reason, Phil's murder was done in front of his family, and the Lupatazis would have been expected, pushed even, by the commission, to have Tony punished with a similar fate. We can assume only a few people outside of that secret meeting know Butch turned on Phil, so it looks like the head of one of the 5 families was murdered in front of his grandkids with no provocation whatsoever, and Butch would look weak if he didn't react against this move from this pygmy thing. And it's a clean slate. It's wiping away the bad blood, the old feuds, a start of a new era. Though I don't think Butch is boss material, and I can see the cycle of bloodshed continuing. It's also worth mentioning that in the original ending envisioned by Sopranos creator David Chase, Tony was supposed to go to a meeting with New York and be killed there. In this theory, Butch would have infiltrated the Sopranos family and got people, namely Paulie and Patsy, to betray Tony. This isn't even necessarily just a theory. Silvio tells Tony that people have been squeezed hard by the war and are being swayed to new management, Bert Gervasi among them, and it's easy to see why both Paulie and Patsy might accept that Tony needs to go. One thing The Sopranos establishes about Paulie is that he's a survivor, and if he was approached with the opportunity of being allowed to live and work under new management with Tony gone, he'd probably take it, especially as though he thought he might get killed by Tony on the boat, and that previous history, like his dealings with Johnny Sack, show that he definitely wasn't loyal to Tony and was always looking after his own interests. When New York is deciding who needs to go, Butch specifically mentions not to go after Paulie, which works with this theory. Paulie is also paranoid. He has dreams about Pussy, who ended up betraying the family. And in Paulie's final scene, the eerie cat walks up to him and stares. And bearing in mind Tony's line about there possibly being a rat behind the wall that the cat often stares at, maybe the show is telling us here that Paulie is betraying Tony. Paulie being a threat to Tony is also referenced in one of Tony's fever dreams. Fans may also want to note that Paulie only shakes Butchie's hand after the secret meeting in season 6. With Patsy, his motivation for betraying Tony is obvious, the murder of his brother. He already tried to drunkenly murder Tony as revenge before, instead settling for pissing in Tony's pool. In the scene where Tony forces Patsy to say he's over his brother's death, Tony mentions Patsy's son, low-key threatening him. If an opportunity came, years down the line, for this man to get revenge for his brother, and also the fact that he is often passed over, I think he'd definitely take it, and it won't be cinematic. There's a lot of weird scenes in season 6, ones that can be interpreted in numerous ways, like Paulie grimacing all the time, as if he's a bit remorseful at betraying Tony after Tony has offered him control of the April crew. There's the cold, awkward exchanges during the Parisi Sopranos family meeting, and by the way, Patsy's son is marrying Meadow, so Patsy is coming closer and closer to the throne in other ways. Not to mention, Meadow might have told Patsy's son that they were eating at Holston's that night. Other weird scenes include the part with Paulie and Patsy in the bathroom, with Paulie saying, "It's all yours," and then the camera lingering on Patsy. And another between the two, shortly after the part where Silvio tells Tony about underlings possibly being swayed to new management, Paulie saying to Patsy, "You'll be fine, don't worry about it," and saying, "Don't discuss this until we're in the Pichadu." It doesn't quite make sense that Patsy would be worried and they would be having this kind of conversation if they were simply talking about the hit on Phil Leotardo. In the scene where Paulie says to Tony that he thinks the April crew might be cursed, he only accepts the offer to take over it, with an alarmed expression I might add, when Tony says he might give it to Patsy, as if Paulie has panicked, thinking that Patsy might decide against killing Tony if the man is offering him a promotion. So there you have it, a huge roster of characters that could have wanted Tony dead, with my personal favourite theory of the lot being that Butchie, Paulie and Patsy were all involved.
Skip the preambles.
Okay, so I guess if you've clicked on this video, you know who Tony is. And you'll also know the most discussed aspect of The Sopranos is always the ending, as Tony sat at the diner with his family and the screen blacked out. What happened? Was Tony killed? Was it Zelensky? Long John Silver maybe? Or did life just carry on as normal? What does the ending mean? For sure, I have never really been too interested in discussing this show's ending, and I sense that people are starting to get bored. Discussions on the ending, they died on the vine, petered out. I made a video on it some time ago, which was basically a compilation of everything David Chase publicly said on the ending, a video which is now out of date as he's spoken about it multiple times since. For me, discussions on the ending was somewhat redundant.
No, I don't want to talk about that situation ever again with anybody.
Because I always felt it didn't matter whether Tony died or not, or who had him popped. For me, the ending surmised that Tony Soprano was finished, every which way but loose. He had way too many enemies, his loyal circle were dead, and he had Carlo's testimony hanging over him. As he says himself, there's only two endings for a guy like him, jail or dead. Plus, he has completely lost his humanity by the end of the season. This is more important. The final scene harks back to Tony's dinner with his family in the season 1 finale, where he tells them to remember the little moments. AJ makes a callback to this, which Tony doesn't even remember and assumes is sarcasm. Even Junior, with his mind rotting from dementia, still remembers the little moments.
We used to play catch.
Tony has wronged so many people, by the time someone does have him killed, it doesn't matter who it was because so many people were justified in wanting him gone. Tony Soprano is finished, and he doesn't even have Melfi's therapy sessions anymore to slow the toxicity process. In any case though, the ending of The Sopranos is still worth discussing. Using the technique of positive visualization, I do feel Tony bought it in the end. And rather than present a case of what I thought happened, I made a video compiling all the major ending theories and highlighting the evidences. Did Rhiannon have something to do with it? Was little Carmine pulling the strings? Could multiple theories be true at the same time? As in, maybe New York put out a hit on Tony and yet Eugene's wife's hitman got there first. Check out that video I did on the ending, plus a bonus one I did on Eugene's connection with the ending theory. This is the best theory on The Sopranos' ending, in my opinion. The most logical conclusion as to who did Tony in. One of the reasons is that it is explicitly stated in the show. We're not going into the unknown not knowing. There's no mental gymnastics required to come to this conclusion. We decapitate and do business with what's left, as Phil Leotardo says at one point. They got redundant upper management, bleeds off half the kick, take them out and absorb the whole thing, as Butch says at another. Plus, need I mention that one of the original endings of the show had Tony whacked by New York? The point being is that Tony getting killed by the Lupitazis has always been in the air. Phil planned it. Butchie tried to do it during the war. It's stated in the show and is planned, unlike other theories. It's just a matter of whether New York went through with it and who was involved. Silvio even says at one point that people are being swayed to new management. You don't need to be San Tzu to feel it's the most plausible theory. It has connective tissue from previous events and would work for several reasons, not least because it feels organic and something realistic, for reasons I will discern in time. So let's take a look at the evidences and motivations for each of the three characters, starting with Butch. In this video, I'm not too interested in symbolisms and dreams, though I will talk about that kind of stuff a bit. I'm more focused on character motivations and tangible evidences. Now, I've already made a video on why Butchie sold out Phil.
Thank you. That was great.
So I won't go into that, but Butch had his eyes everywhere. He saw that the war was costly and he had battle fatigue. He may have made a truce with Tony in their sit down and backed off, but Butch had plenty of reasons for wanting Tony dead. I mean, he straight up hates the guy, as shown by his general demeanor towards Mr. Taipei personality, whether at Phil's house with the drills, when he squares up to Tony at the hospital, and the mere fact that Tony pointed a gun at his face and threatened him during the Coco beatdown. In a world where throwing food at someone has to be resolved, this was a major event that went unpunished. And remember, Butch was don-ho about killing Tony when talking with Phil. It was he who was really pushing it at a time where even Mr. Pavlavi was unwilling to cause dysentery in the ranks. Also, Butch may have heard through the grapevine that Tony was about to go down on a RICO case, and it would be in the best interest of New York if Tony was taken out to avoid him flipping, which, as I discussed in a previous video, is more likely than not by the end of the show. It's interesting to ponder whether it was always the plan to take out Tony, even with the final sit-down, with Butch wanting to clean up the bad blood in the families by taking out the two petty warring personalities, Phil and then Tony, or whether New York made a decision after the hit on Phil. After all, when you ostensibly lose a war to some pygmy thing, and the boss of one of the 5 families is shot in front of his family and has his face crushed so his mother can't give him an open casket at his funeral, you gotta respond, for your own sake. The rank and file, and even the other 4 families would demand satisfaction, so Butch would give the go-ahead on Tony Soprano. As a side note, I don't see Butch lasting as boss. He's just a gangster, I suppose. A grunt who'll get replaced after being found on a sidewalk in a pool of his own blood. He just never comes off as boss material. So let's move on to Patsy. Even the actor who plays him feels Patsy was involved in Tony's death precisely because Patsy's twin brother Philly was killed on the orders of Tony, something which infuriates Patsy. Of course, he said he got over it, but you never truly get over something like that. In fact, he drunkenly almost killed Tony before settling for pissing in his pool. Patsy gets screwed over repeatedly with promotions. When Christopher gets put in charge of Paulie's crew instead of him, when Vito dies and Carlo is up, and when Carlo flips and Paulie becomes captain of that crew. I mean, how much more betrayal can Patsy take? He also openly shows dissent on occasion, like here.
Thank you. That was great.
And you just never really get the feeling that this guy would care much if he woke up one day and was told Tony died and he reports to new management. There is also the thing with his son. Carlo's son Jason was arrested for selling X, and Carlo goes missing, presumably flipping. Jason was close to Patsy's son, who was only introduced around 2 episodes pre the finale, and there must surely have been a reason for his inclusion so late in the show. When the Parisis have dinner with Tony's family, with Patsy's son engaged to Meadow, there is an awkwardness in the air, and it isn't just because of Mrs. Parisi's inability to tell jokes. They look nervous, and even more so when Tony asks why Jason Parisi isn't here. Tony knows Carlo is singing like a canary, and he calls Jason Gervasi Jason Parisi's pal, and he says he heard Carlo's Jason got into some trouble. Patsy and Tony exchange looks. Patsy wants his wife to shut up and not discuss it, but Tony has clearly put something in the air, an insinuation maybe, that he thinks Patsy might also flip to save his son if he is caught up in Jason Gervasi's shenanigans, if he's already been arrested maybe. After all, why isn't he here? Just the idea that Tony suspects Patsy's son is in trouble could be enough to flip, putting both father and son at risk of being whacked. Tony killed Philly, he killed his close friend, the OG Santa Claus, he killed a captain over a horse, so I don't want to hear in the comment section that he wouldn't have had Patsy clipped because their children were getting married.
End of subject!
I don't feel Patsy is the kind of character to orchestrate such a conspiracy, but if he was approached and saw which way the wind was blowing, saw that his own life was in danger, he'd agree to cross sides, playing a passive but meaningful role in the cabal against Tony. That could provide an explanation in case people ask, why did he take so long to take revenge for his brother? In fact, through his son, who would be told by Meadow, Patsy may have informed New York where Tony was staying at Holston's, though that isn't really important because by that point Tony wasn't in hiding and could easily have been followed. By marrying the soon-to-be deceased mob boss's daughter, Patsy would feel symbolically closer to the throne. It's plausible that he thought he would be put in charge, but New York would assure Paulie that Patsy would also be taken out, and in turn Butch could have Paulie killed and absorbed Jersey. In other words, in this world of rats and turncoats, they all betray each other. A major hole in this theory is that Patsy is shot at by New York goons and he actively shoots back. There's no way this is staged, we're not making a western here. So how do you explain this? Well, maybe the shooters didn't know it was him and were in the moment. Maybe they didn't care and were willing to take him out because he was a low-level Jersey guy anyway, even if they did make a deal with him. Or maybe they didn't even know he was involved, as New York only dealt with Paulie directly, who sold Patsy out. So he, Paulie, would be the only one in Jersey after the fact to know he betrayed Tony, which is a very Paulie thing to do. New York quite simply possibly didn't even know Patsy was involved. Which brings us to Paulie himself. Paulie is a snake and the ultimate survivor. He flirted with the idea of becoming boss before, of betraying Tony, and had links, however superficial, with New York. Paulie is established as being terrified of dying, and when it's all said and done, if he's cornered one day and told to meet with Butch, who tells him what the score is, and he can either end up dead like Tony, or become the new boss, or become a puppet head with New York swallowing up Jersey like Ginny swallows up chocolate bars, do you really see Paulie not being swayed by new management? He would do anything to survive, and plus, he had plenty of reasons to betray Tony, not least because of the way Tony treated him in the later seasons. Pine Barrens, Tony favouring Ralph in the sit-down, the pie on my painting fiasco, Bobby leapfrogging Paulie in rank, and of course, the scene where Tony came close to killing Paulie on the boat. We all know Paulie was superstitious. We all know about the 3 o'clock thing. We know he was woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and Tony was sitting at Paulie's 3 o'clock when he was considering murdering him. Maybe he put all this together and he knew the jig was up and Tony's gotta go, taking Christopher's 3 o'clock warning when on the boat. Something is off about Paulie in the final few episodes, something which makes sense if you watch knowing he already knows Tony has been marked for death. His sad expression when being offered the promotion, grimacing when coming out of the Bing, extended shots of him looking pensive. Of course, many of these things can be explained away, like him simply being agitated in a time of war when many of the old crew members are dead after he managed to beat cancer. But that's the brilliance of The Sopranos. Things often work both ways or multiple ways. Paulie's panicked expression when Tony offers the captain role to Patsy is often used as evidence for this theory, another thing which works both ways. Either it hurt his ego, or because he knows Patsy is involved, he thinks Patsy might get cold feet about whacking Tony now that Mr. Mob Boss is giving him his dues, so Paulie quickly accepts the job which he believes is cursed. There are two curious scenes between him and Patsy. One in the urinals where Paulie says, "It's all yours," presumably referencing the Phil Leotardo hit, and another where Paulie says to him, "You'll be fine, don't worry about it," and saying, "Don't discuss this until we're in the Pisha Do." I mean, if they were simply talking about Phil, why would Patsy be worried? Unless I guess they were talking about Carlo's son and Patsy was talking to Paulie about how uncomfortable he felt with his son known to be close to Carlo's son. But it's all a bit off. But it fits perfectly if you imagine they're conspiring against Tony. Not to mention about the scene where Patsy is pissing like a racehorse. The last time we saw him pissing was when he was plotting to kill Tony. Paulie saying "it's all yours" could mean he's done his part in the conspiracy and Patsy's part is coming next. Or maybe he's insinuating that the big seat will soon be Patsy's. In that dream that Paulie had when he is approached by the traitor pussy, Paulie says, "When my time comes, tell me, will I stand up?" This could be in reference to dying or getting whacked, being able to take it standing like a man. But it could also work with this theory, i.e., when they approach me to betray Tony, will I be loyal to my capo? It works, doesn't it? I know, I must have been top of my fucking class, right? There's no need to thank me.
Thank you. That was great.
When New York are discussing who to take out, Butch shuts down the idea of clipping Paulie as they only want upper management, which is strange, seeing as though Paulie has been around for ages and he is one of Tony's closest men. Maybe Butch didn't make this decision because Carmine thought the world of Paulie, but because he had already made a deal with him. This all takes place in a barbershop that Butch has, and Paulie walks into the Bing at one point with a whole box of scissors, which he may have gotten from Butch at the barbershop. The box of scissors could also be symbolism for 30 pieces of silver, and there's more Judas symbolism, with Paulie seeing what he thinks is a vision of the Virgin Mary. There's more scissor talk, with Paulie killing his mother's friend, whose husband left her a fortune from selling barber scissors. When the mob wives are doing their home movie thing, Rosalie talks to Adriana about Judas and the Last Supper, which is a very similar ending to The Sopranos. Tony has a Last Supper with his family. And who is the Judas in this situation? It can only be one man. Tony mentions that the cat who always stares at the photo of Christopher could possibly smell a rat in the wall, and this same cat approaches Paulie in his final scene, implying he's a rat. Another clue is that in the Funhouse dream, Tony envisions a scene that The Godfather 3 shamelessly ripped off, where Silvio says,
Our true enemy has yet to reveal himself.
And after this we are shown Tony killing Paulie, and the screen goes black. And finally, in the last sit-down, Paulie shakes Butch's hand behind Tony's back as everyone leaves, when there was no real need for Butch to shake his hand. So there you have it. My evidence is for why I think a combination of Butch, Paulie and Patsy had Tony killed.